Paper Crafters Library. In this video I'm going to show you how to create this So Very Grateful for You greeting card. So let's get started. You're going to need a 4 1/4 by 11 inch piece of crumb cake cardstock, and you're going to score it down the center at 5.5 inches. You're going to fold and crease along that score line with your bone folder, creating a standard size 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. Once you have this folded, you're going to set this aside, and you're now going to need a piece of vanilla cardstock that measures 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. You're going to die cut a label from that, and I'm going to be using the Top Note label from Stampin' Up, and I'm going to run this through my Big Shot, die cutting that label from my vanilla piece of cardstock. So now you're back from your Big Shot and you have your die cut label from your vanilla cardstock. You're going to stamp your flower or floral image to that. You're going to need a solid flower in order to stamp this, and I'm going to ink this up using some markers. This stamp is found in the Wendy Vecchi Botanical Arts stamp set. And like I said, it is a solid image. This works best with a solid image. I will be using Cajun Craze, Old Olive, and Daffodil Delight Stampin' Write markers from Stampin' Up. I always work from my lightest marker to my darkest marker so that I don't get any of the ink transferring onto the lighter ends. And in order to color these onto my stamp, directly onto my stamp, I'm going to use the brush side, which is the bigger side. So I'm going to start with my Daffodil Delight, and I'm going to color in the head of the flower, just coloring in all of those petals, again with the brush side of my marker. And then once this is filled in, you're going to color in the stem with your Old Olive marker. And this is where the transfer may occur, where I just started on the top of the stem there. If you pick up some Old Olive or some Daffodil ink onto your Old Olive, it won't ruin the end of the marker, whereas if you had picked up some Old Olive on the end of your Daffodil Delight marker, it could discolor the end. So once you have your Old Olive stem colored in, you're now going to take your darkest one. And again, this is where the transfer may occur, so it's okay because it's the darkest color. I'm just going to take my brush end and I'm just going to add some highlights to the center of the flower and the center of each of my petals, just to highlight, to make it look a little bit more natural to each petal of this flower. Now I am working fairly quickly, so my ink hasn't had a chance to dry yet, but if at this time you need to remoisten, you would huff on this stamp. You then are going to stamp this towards the left hand side of your die cut label. When you remove it, you'll see that you have this beautifully colored image on your label. You're now going to take this label and we're going to trim this off. I'm going to make it a little larger than half, so I'm not going to use the tips as my guide. I'm just going to cut in this lowered section of the label. So I'm just going to remove about 1/3 of my label with my paper trimmer. So off to my paper trimmer to clean this up. So now I'm back from my paper trimmer, and you can see here that I've cut my label so that I have only 2/3 of my label here. I'm going to add my greeting into the bottom left hand corner of this label before I start adding it to my card base, and I'm going to be using the U as well as the remainder of the greeting that I will be stamping on the rest of the card. They're both found in Gratitude Journal from Paper Tray. I'm going to be using some Early Espresso Classic ink from Stampin' Up in order to stamp this. So you're just going to ink up your greeting and you're going to stamp that in the bottom left hand corner of your cut label. Once you have that part stamped, you can set aside this portion of the stamp and you can set aside your ink for a moment. And you're now going to bring in some extra cardstock, so you can also set this aside. When you're working with the new classic inks from Stampin' Up, just keep in mind they do take a little bit longer to dry, so you want to set this aside and allow that greeting a little bit of time to dry so that it doesn't get smudged. You're now going to need a piece of designer paper, and here I am using the designer series paper or pattern papers from Stampin' Up, and this is the Cajun Craze pattern, and this piece measures 3 3/4 by 5 inches. You're also going to need a piece of early espresso cardstock that measures 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. You're going to take your designer paper, you're going to center and stick your designer paper to your early espresso pattern or cardstock with your double-sided adhesive. And you want to leave equal borders on all 4 sides. Once you have that in place, you're now going to need a piece of satin ribbon, and I'm using the Early Espresso satin ribbon from Stampin' Up, and I do believe this is retired. You're just going to lay this on your cardstock. This piece of ribbon is about a 6-inch piece, and I'm just going to lay it on my cardstock like so. You're going to take a piece, you're going to take and add this to your card, or your matted cardstock here with some double-sided adhesive. So I'm about 1 inch up from the bottom of my matted cardstock, and I'm only wrapping the left-hand side of this ribbon around to the back and sticking that down to the back of my cardstock with my double-sided adhesive only on the left-hand side. So you can see that I'm just going to leave this edge stuck down to the front, but that will be covered with your image or your floral stamped label. So now you're going to need a piece of Cajun Craze cardstock that measures 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. You're going to center and stick your matted designer paper with your ribbon to your Cajun Craze piece, leaving equal borders on all 4 sides. So now you're going to stamp the remainder of your greeting. You're going to take your stamped label, and you're going to align the left or the right hand side of your label, the straight cut side, with the right hand side of your patterned paper here. And I'm just putting this here for placement for a moment. You're then going to take the remainder of the greeting, and this is the "So Very Grateful For You" section of the greeting. You're going to ink this up, and I'm just using this for positioning, so you want to make sure that you stamp this as close to the left-hand side as possible. So I can see that I just have a little bit of room here, so I'm going to stamp this just above my ribbon and very close to the left-hand side there. So now you can see that you've stamped your greeting, and we're ready to start bringing in more of the elements of our card. But just before we do that, we are going to add in our bow or our faux bow to the left-hand side of our card, just underneath of our greeting. So you're going to need 2 pieces of the same ribbon that you've already had on the card that are each about 4 inches. You're just going to create a loop with 1 piece of your ribbon, and I just added a little bit of designer or double-sided adhesive to the ends, and I'm just folding this over to create a faux loop. You're just going to lay that down. Then you're going to take your second piece, slide it under, and wrap this around. And I've kept this nice and long so that I can work at it. You're just going to wrap this around and stick the ends down with mini glue dots, creating a faux bow. So I'm actually sliding it underneath my first piece and then attaching it around my bow. You could use some double-sided adhesive or a mini glue dot in order to secure this in place. And then you will just take and trim off the excess ribbon that you have with your snips or your ribbon scissors. So you're just going to trim off that excess ribbon And you want it to make sure that you tuck that in so that it's sticking down, or it's adhering that ribbon to the first piece towards the back of the bow. So now you can see that you're left with this beautiful faux bow, and we're ready to, like I said, start adding our elements together. So you're going to take your label and you're going to stick this down to the right hand side of your card base with some Stampin' Dimensionals directly over top of this ribbon end. I no longer need my ink, so I'm just going to set that aside. And again, I'm aligning the right hand cut side of my label with the right hand side of my designer paper. And that should hug right around that first part of the greeting. Then you're going to take this, you're going to bring your card base back in, and you're going to center and stick your matted cardstock with your focal point on it to your card base using some double-sided Stampin' Dimensionals. And you're going to stick that down to your card base, leaving equal borders on all four sides. And there you have your So Very Grateful for You greeting card. I hope you enjoyed stamping with me.